Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Nguyễn, pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as a Senior Director of Diversity Programs here at the UCLA Alumni Association. I'm here today to talk to you about how you can help us build a more inclusive alumni scholarship process in these coming weeks. I want to thank you in advance for not only taking the time to listen to me in regards to how we can do this, but also volunteering to read applications of our very talented students that come from all walks of life and helping us make these hard decisions these coming weeks. I also wanted to put out that our area is somewhat new, so if you haven't heard of us before, I encourage you to check us out on our website. We were created a couple years ago to find ways for alumni to engage with various communities that are here at UCLA, as well as in our general alumni population, and also to work towards issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here's a website if you want to check out a little bit more about us. So first and foremost, as you go into this scholarship process, we want to underline one thing. Diversity is something we value a lot here at UCLA, and a lot of it is because of our community here. It's one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse campuses in the nation, and actually when it comes to diversity, we're thinking beyond things like race and ethnicity, but also where people are coming from, what their genders are, their sexual orientation, as well as any life experiences that really create such diverse narratives here at UCLA. So if anything, we want you to understand that you will be reading students that come from all walks of life, and that's a great thing, and to be open to thinking about diversity as you engage in the review process. There's not much I can really say in less than 10 minutes, so I'm going to keep it short and simple and ask you to really think about one thing. This isn't a video to give you a how-to in regards to thinking about different diverse communities, because we would be here for quite a long time to give you a rundown on every single community. But there are some basic tools we can think about that is more inclusive and probably a little bit of a way for us to be inclusive in small ways that can have a huge impact. So one thing is really thinking about the concept of unconscious bias. It's something that we all have, and it's really hard to sometimes identify. And so that's what this video is really asking you to flex a little bit, is how can you really explore those, particularly because you're going to be reviewing applications, and it's not a chance for you to be able to talk to someone one-on-one. You're actually looking at someone's life on a piece of paper. And so in that process, we want you to be aware of some of the biases that you may have when you're looking at a piece of paper about somebody. Luckily, being a Research One campus, we actually have a lot of research that has been out there to think about how unconscious bias plays out in all sorts of ways, from the hiring process to everyday interactions. There's been a lot of research that shows that there are techniques that we can utilize to actually minimize the impact of unconscious bias. So I'm actually going to give you 3 strategies as a way to address unconscious bias, particularly in this process. 1 is education, 2 is thinking about your own identity and how that impacts the way you think, and 3, thinking about who you connect with. So the first strategy is thinking about education. As alumni, learning is going to be a lifelong process, and it has been for me, particularly as a diversity practitioner that's been involved for over 10 years. I find myself constantly still needing to learn. And oftentimes I come across these concepts that actually help me organize my thoughts a little bit, particularly when it comes to thinking about difference and places that I don't understand. And so one of the concepts I'm actually introduce you today that's been really meaningful to me is this concept of implicit bias. It's pretty basic. Basically, it's attitudes or stereotypes we may hold outside of our conscious awareness. So I'm not talking about the biases that you may be aware of, that you may conceal or suppress. I'm actually talking about the things that you don't know that you don't know. So when we break down this definition a little bit more, attitudes are basically your evaluation, which you will be doing this process, of some sort of concept, a person, place, or thing. In this process, we're thinking about people. Those attitudes can be positive or negative. And then the other side of that definition was stereotypes. Basically, they are beliefs that are mentally associated with a given category. These are typically informed by our society in the right or wrong, media, or maybe you're thinking about a personal experience that you had with one person, and it may cause you to think about that person's identity and affiliate that interaction that you have with the whole entire group that that person shares an identity for. So some common ones are Asians are good at math. Men are often associated with the workplace more than women. The key thing here to understand is even though you don't endorse the stereotype, which is what typically happens with implicit bias, they can actually influence the way that you think. So being aware of these things are actually really important to helping us address some of the unconscious bias that may pop up for you during this process. Again, this is a very quick lesson on implicit bias, and I'll include some links below if you want to learn more about it. But again, it's just a tool for you to understand how you think and how you can help us build a more inclusive process is by educating yourself. Second piece is thinking about self-awareness. We come to the table when we help with decision making with many ways that we've been informed, from the way we grew up to the way our job informs our values to our personal interactions with friends. And so the second strategy is really thinking about the concept of self-awareness. In particular, when it comes to unconscious bias, is recognizing the biases that you may have for a particular group. And being aware of those things can help minimize the impact of your bias. Now we're talking about unconscious bias. So how will you know what your biases are? I'm here to show you that there's actually some tangible tools that you can use to explore the biases that you don't know that you may have. There is a tool that came out of Harvard called the Implicit Association Test, and there's the website below. And it's a pretty intense website, but what I like about it is it gives you sort of these quick tests to help you name where your biases are. And they actually go across the gamut of social identities, as you can see, from age to religion to sexuality. This may encourage you to come to this website and check out one of these tests, and it may be just the process itself could be an eye-opening experience to understand what you don't know that you don't know. So that's a tool that you can use to actually develop more self-awareness to help address unconscious bias. Lastly, and this is probably a more expansive way than the other two, first being education and the second being exploring more about yourself in terms of what unconscious bias that you may have, is thinking about your own social network. It's actually one of the number one things that fuels our understanding of diversity is basically who you interact with. And so there's two things I always share when it comes to people asking me, how can we address issues of oppression or understand more about diversity? Sometimes we lose in the conversation when we think about all those conversations have to be done in the face of difference. Like if I am an Asian American and I want to learn more about the Black community, I need to find a Black person to really understand that community better. What I'm telling you is you can actually do this in the face of sameness and difference. So for me in particular, as I think about learning more about the African American community, it's also important for me to connect with Asian Americans to better understand how our race informs my larger understanding of race. It's also great in terms of thinking about areas that I don't belong to, like thinking about our undocumented population, which is very much a value here that UCLA has been a leading force in addressing those movements to be more inclusive undocumented folks. I really had to do a self-check in terms of talking to those that aren't undocumented to understand how I can be an ally. But at the same time, I also interface with our communities that do share in that identity to better understand how I can be an ally. So learning in the face of sameness and difference is a great tool to help inform how you understand the areas of bias that you have. And these play out in several ways, from the friends and family that you interact with, volunteering, and actually a great place to actually start doing this is even with our own alumni networks. We have 12 different identity-based alumni networks that would love to connect with you if you're ever interested in doing that. So taking these three large strategies, how can that play out in the alumni scholarship selection process? So if we're really thinking about unconscious bias as a thing to address in this process, there are a few things that you can think about when you actually go through the review process. So at the end, when you come up with your evaluations, I really want you to consider, are you using a gut feeling to inform your decisions in this? Particularly when it comes to applications or interviews, we really want you to think about assessing the behavior or the performance of the candidate using concrete examples that you are experiencing in that moment, right? So don't think about it from an overarching place, really also think of what's in front of you. Secondly, as this whole conversation has been around, check your own biases and stereotypes. Do you find yourself not relating to a particular candidate and it's sort of changing your rating? Do you feel like you don't know a community well enough, so you feel like you can't make a decision in a way that feels indicative of the individual's whole sense of self? So think about your responses or decisions or behavior that may be informed by these stereotypes, and take a moment to intentionally think about positive thoughts when encountering those individuals from groups that you may not understand much about. And then lastly, as much as like social identities will pop in the applications, we want you to think about the individual at hand. Everyone is very complex, everyone's diverse in their own ways, and that's what we want you to really evaluate on. What are they sharing with us that informs their life experiences, and thinking about the individual. This isn't saying be colorblind or being not cognizant of identities that people share, because some of those journeys to understanding someone's identity, like understanding that you don't identify as heterosexual, or having to come out as being undocumented, or better understanding how your religion has informed your life, those things are important parts of people's journeys, and that is something that can inform this process. So it's not saying don't think about people's identity, but think about people's identities and the ways that they have expressed it and how it's informed their journey that has brought them here to UCLA. And that's about all I have for you today, but always available for questions, particularly during this process, and you'll find my contact information below. But thank you again for taking a moment to think about how you can help us build a more inclusive process. Not only are we asking you to do this, but we've done this ourselves here at the Alumni Association. We actually just went through our whole process to look at areas where we can make it more inclusive, from the rubrics to the interview questions. We did a whole vetting to see how the process itself structurally can be also more inclusive. So you are helping us from a one-on-one individual standpoint, but also be reassured we're thinking about this on a structural level too here at the Alumni Association. Thank you again for listening to me, and thank you in advance for helping us build an inclusive process by seeing how your own actions can inform your decision-making process, and to flex those skills around understanding maybe where your unconscious biases are and limiting and minimizing those so we can have a more equitable and diverse and inclusive process. Thanks.